Hello, my name is Mr. Boff, and in this video, I want to go through how you can effectively select a topic and then conduct useful research into that topic for your spoken language component, the speech you need to be delivering over the next week or two that's going to form part of your English language GCSE. So, the primary focus of the first part of this video will all be about selecting a topic. How do we choose a topic that we can talk about for 5 minutes, answer some questions on from the audience, and choosing a topic that's going to put us in a position where we can be aiming for that merit or indeed that distinction. So a topic that is rigorous, challenging, potentially provocative, obviously of interest to us, but also the level of complexity and ambition that, as I've just said, will allow us to aim for a merit or a distinction. Once we've covered that, we'll then look at this question of research because there's a lot of misconceptions around what it means to research effectively. I want to look at what makes a credible source and then how we can start to think about connecting that research, the facts and statistics and evidence that we select from various sources around the internet, how we can gather all of that together and then connect that to our actual topic and indeed our speeches. Okay, so how do we choose a suitable topic? Now, I don't want to tell you, and your English teacher doesn't want to just tell you what topic to do. It's always far better if the topic comes from you, something that you're interested in, something that you are passionate about. Now, you can discuss something topical, you can think about a moment or a period in history that you're really passionate about, you can share a detailed account of a hobby or something that really interests you that you do in your spare time, or you can, make an argument about something. You want something in society to change or be different. You think that there's some injustice or unfairness that is going unaddressed or not dealt with, and that you want your audience to change their mind about it, to do something about it, okay, to behave differently perhaps. Now, a good place to start is thinking, what do you like talking about? What are your interests? What are your hobbies? What captures your attention? What subjects in school really engage you? Do you find particularly interesting? Thinking through those sorts of things will help you identify great topics to choose from. Now, I've been thinking about, well, okay, what am I interested in? What have I been maybe listening to a lot recently or reading about recently? Or even what have I done recently that I might wish to discuss or talk about? And one thing that I've done relatively recently is I got rid of my smartphone. So I got rid of my smartphone mostly because I read the book on the right there. It's called How to Break Up with Your Phone. I read that book, and also at the same time, my wife read that book. And the book goes through, as the title suggests, why it's a good idea to change your relationship with your smartphone. It got me to engage in a lot of introspection, a lot of thinking about my own behaviors around my smartphone, basically feeling kind of addicted to it, feeling that it was a distraction from what was important, feeling that it was affecting my levels of concentration. I definitely felt that my concentration when reading wasn't as good as perhaps it was when I was, say, at university and the kind of texts I was reading at university. And then the way I felt that my attention was kind of wandering when I was reading something more challenging. And that lure of the smartphone, of the kind of skim reading that was going on, I didn't like that. I didn't like the way it was getting in the way of my relationship with my wife and with my family more generally. It just felt like a real distraction. So I thought, well, I'm going to get rid of it. And so I read that book, and it got me really thinking more generally about what is the impact of this technology, because it is pretty new. It's only really since the early 2010s that everyone's had a smartphone. Really, from about 2012, 2013, really, that smartphone use just skyrocketed. And then I came across this book here, The Anxious Generation, which looks at smartphone use and technology use, screen use, but particularly among that sometimes called digital natives, the kind of generation born into smartphones, born into the idea, or at that stage where basically everyone has a smartphone, and thinking, okay, well, what's that doing to young people? Okay, now there are criticisms of this book, and I've read criticisms of The Anxious Generation, and some of them feel valid, but I think the general thesis and argument of the book is convincing. It's essentially making the argument that there is a connection between the rise of smartphones and access to them and all sorts of negative outcomes, particularly for young people, and in some ways, particularly for teenage girls who seem to be especially vulnerable to social media platforms like Instagram. So it got me thinking about all of that. And I thought, you know what? This would be quite an interesting speech to do. It's something I feel passionate about. It's something that I can talk about from my own experience. It's not easy to get rid of a smartphone. It's inconvenient in all sorts of different ways, but I feel like I can talk about that, and I want to talk about it. So that's my topic. That's why I've chosen it. And then it got me thinking about, okay, well, research. Okay, now when it comes to research, so that I've chosen my topic, and I'm going to go through all sorts of different other topics that you could be choosing a little later in the video. But that's how I've chosen mine. I've thought, what am I interested in? What do I know about? What have I done recently? What do I feel passionate about? What do I want to say that maybe is going to be maybe not confrontational, but present something challenging to my audience? Because if I'm going to do my speech as a teacher talking to my class, I've got a class of teenagers. They're basically all going to have smartphones. I'm going to say to them, get rid of their smartphones. That's quite it's quite ambitious, really. It's going to be a real challenge to get them to do something like that, to change their mind. Because certainly when I've said I've got rid of my smartphone, most teenagers have looked at me like, sir, what's wrong with you? So what do we mean, or what we mean when we say research? What we don't mean is we don't mean you just Googling the topic. Okay, so should I get rid of my smartphone? What's the first thing that comes up? I'm just going to read that and I'll copy and paste that, try and put it in my speech somehow. That's not research. One of the key things we need to do when researching is think, is the source reliable? Is the website reliable, credible? And that means, generally speaking, not looking just at blog posts, certainly not researching by looking at videos on TikTok, most of which are just going to be riddled with misinformation. Okay, not doing that. Looking for reputable websites. I'm going to give you some examples over the next few slides. It might even mean looking at both websites, finding are there books on this particular topic that I could be maybe getting from the library or that I could be looking up online, maybe finding out who the author is. Are there interviews, like interview podcasts with the author? So, for example, if I go back to the previous slide, the Jonathan Haidt Anxious Generation book, he's done loads of interviews which are available on the internet, available on podcasts, for example, as well as Catherine Price. There are lots of interviews with her talking about her book. That might be, listen to them. Okay, that's a place to start. But asking those questions, can I trust this? Is this likely to be true? Where's it coming from? Is it from an expert source? Is this website reputable? So, to break down the research process even more, we need to, one, define our focus. Okay, what is your focus? Right, getting rid of smartphones. Why you should get it done for? Okay, that's what damage are smartphones potentially causing according to the research. Then we're going to identify some reliable sources. I've got those two authors, okay, of those two texts that are both about smartphones and smartphone addiction. So I'm going to look those authors up. I'm going to go on their author websites. I'm going to research them. I'm going to listen to interviews that they've done, whether those interviews are videos on YouTube or interviews as podcasts on something like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Then, as I'm listening, or indeed I'm reading what they've written, I'm going to be making notes. Okay, I'm going to be noting down key facts, statistics that I'm going to be able to use to push my argument, to promote my argument. Then I'm going to be thinking, well, does this really connect to my topic? Okay, I've got loads of interesting ideas. How can I relate this? If I know that on average people check their smartphones 55 times a day, but very often that can go all the way up to north of 100 or more, okay, why is that important? Well, that is an important statistic because it reveals that people are checking their phones almost on a kind of compulsive basis. There's no real reason why you should be checking your smartphone 55 times over the course of, 14 hours of wake time or 16 hours of being awake, something like that. Why are we doing that? Is that healthy? Does that suggest a positive, healthy relationship with that piece of technology? So are there other bits of data that I can then gather together that are also going to support that suggest that smartphone use is, compulsion. Are there statistics out there that I've got that link to the idea of how are young people spending their free time? To what extent is smartphone use now a major component of how young people are using their free time when they're not at school? And then building on from that, how am I going to use this? Are there statistics, or is there a particular statistic that I could use maybe in the opening of my speech that's going to hook people's attention? Maybe it is that 55 times. Why are we checking our smartphones on average 55 times a day? Maybe there's an opportunity there for a little bit of audience interaction. You could be saying, when you get home today, go on the digital well-being part of the settings menu if you have an Android phone or the equivalent on an iOS device. Check how many times you're checking your phone. What's your average daily phone use? Is it an hour? Is it 2 hours? Is it 3 hours? What does that add up to over the course of a week? What does that add up to over the course of a month, a year, and so on? Maybe that would be an interesting way to start my speech. And then to be thinking, well, when we're, and it's a morbid thought, but maybe this is an interesting way of putting it, when we're on our deathbeds, will we go, I spent of my one life on earth 3,000 hours, probably for many people it'd be much higher, but let's say 3,000, 5,000 hours on my smartphone. That's a huge number of hours, more than, that I was spending with that device when I could have been talking to my friends and family. Okay, which brings me on to this text. Now, this was something I came across by listening to a podcast interview with the author of The Anxious Generation. And he mentioned this book. Okay, it's called Careless People. And this is a book by Sarah Wynne Williams. Now, who's Sarah Wynne Williams? We're thinking about credible sources again. Is this going to be a useful, credible, reliable source? Well, Wynne Williams was someone who worked really, really high up, very senior person who worked at Facebook before Facebook turned into the kind of parent company called Meta. And in this book, she makes a whole series of allegations about the behavior of senior people at Meta, or Facebook as it was then. And she makes a series of allegations about what was going on with the algorithm that is kind of running things behind the scene when you're using Instagram. And so she mentions some interesting things. One of the interesting things is that she alleges that Instagram effectively kind of records and notes when a user deletes a number of selfies in relatively quick succession, and that triggers more adverts for beauty products. Now, this is a very serious allegation. Basically, there is a sense that Instagram is designed to recognize when you are kind of psychologically vulnerable, okay, particularly around your physical appearance, and uses that vulnerability as a moment to heavily bombard you with particular sorts of advertising. She also makes a number of points that are really interesting around social media use. And obviously, I'm going to be talking about that as part of the issue with smartphones, because why do people constantly get their phones out, often to check their social media accounts? She makes the point, and this is repeated elsewhere, lots of people have gone on record saying this, that senior executives at Facebook, now Meta, don't let their kids anywhere near Facebook, and certainly not anywhere near Instagram. Why is that? She alleges because they know full well how damaging it is. So I could include a quotation here, and this is an interesting one. Okay, I would say, this is a quote from Sarah Wynne Williams. I would say, oh, has your teen used the new products we're about to launch? And Wynne Williams said, and they're like, my teenagers are not allowed on Facebook. I don't have my teenagers on Instagram. These executives, she alleges, they know the harm this product does. Now, if you've got a dumb phone, your relationship with social media changes completely. I still have Facebook, okay? I'm not a regular Facebook user anyway, but I have Facebook. But if I want to go on Facebook, I can't just go on Facebook like on my phone. I have to sit down, I have to sit in front of my computer, and I have to log on like I did when I had a first Facebook account at university. Totally different relationship. I cannot go, because of my phone, on any social media when I'm out and about, ever. I just physically can't do it. My phone doesn't offer that functionality. Okay, so this is one interesting thing. And she's credible, it's a reliable source because she worked at Facebook. She knows social media. She used to work for one of the major social media platforms. Okay, something else. Again, the author of The Anxious Generation is one of the individuals mentioned in this particular study. Now, this is when I was researching and reading around some of the research that the author of The Anxious Generation had done. And what we've got here is a graph. And it's a piece of research into adolescent loneliness because it seems like adolescents, teens basically, are saying they are lonelier than ever. Why are they saying they're lonelier than ever? Now, there's all sorts of reasons why we might argue that, but there is a huge rise in loneliness from 2012, 2013. Why is that? Well, why are those years important? Because those are the years when smartphone use exploded, okay, massively. Basically, 2012, 2013 is the point when pretty much everyone has a smartphone, okay, over the age of about 11 or 12. And that coincides with a huge increase in loneliness. Now, correlation does not, of course, mean causation. There may be other causes, but there's loads and loads of evidence, graph after graph, study after study, and you can see this is actually from the Journal of Adolescent Health, that graph after graph, research after research piece shows us that all sorts of negative mental health outcomes skyrocket in 2012, 2013. Now, either something else unique is going on in those years, or giving young people access to the internet in their pocket whenever they want is maybe, just maybe, not all that healthy for us, both physically and indeed psychologically. So I know this is credible. This is a piece of detailed academic research over a number of years as well, and in lots of different places, and including a huge number of participants in this piece of research. Okay, again, what we've got here, a BBC News article, far more reliable than some random Facebook post. So I was reading through this article, and it's all from 2022, talking about why people were ditching their smartphones, right? And then I was reading through this article, and I come across Hilda Berg. Who's she? She's a psychotherapist. That's interesting. She's written a book called, guess what? The Phone Addiction Workbook. Right. Well, I'm going to search her up. So I did. I went on her website. I found that she'd gathered all of her articles that she'd written on all sorts of different subjects. And then I found this one, all about Irish people, because I believe she's based in Ireland, all about Irish people and their use of phones. And then it had some great statistics. And all of these statistics on the right-hand side were from this article. And I could go to the Royal Public Health Society, Deloitte, the Psychology of Popular Media Culture. We've got all of this academic research, detailed academic research that I can go and find out about, and I can find where these stats have come from, and I can verify them. So I know they're accurate. I know they're from reliable sources. I know the Royal Public Health Society is a reliable resource. It's not someone's auntie's dog who's telling me down the pub that this is what they think, okay? It's proper academic research. We can trust it. Okay, as you can see there, it's actually Irish people are above average in terms of their smartphone use. It's 57 times. So there we go. So I read this article, another interesting article. So that's how I researched. I started gathering all of that together. Now, in a new video, in a second video that I'm going to do on the topic, I'm going to go through not just the research, but then obviously how we turn that research into planning, and then how we turn that planning into writing. But what you're seeing in this final slide here is how we can go from very general topics, such as climate change or social media, something like that, to actually turning into a much more focused kind of question that your speech will answer. So if you think, right, I love gaming, okay? You can't just do a speech, oh, I'm just going to talk about gaming for 5 minutes. Well, what's your argument? What are you trying to convince us of? Okay? So maybe we'll write something like, can playing video games improve problem-solving skills? Or something like, are video games art? Should video games be respected in the way we respect television, film, and novels? Okay. Music, a really interesting one. How has streaming changed the way we value music? Why are people going back to physical forms of media for listening to music? There's an explosion in the popularity of records, vinyls, cassettes, and CDs as well. CDs are on the up. They're kind of doing what vinyls did a few years ago. Why are people turning back to physical forms of media for listening to music? Is it maybe that people don't quite like the experience of kind of just streaming stuff. They want the intentionality of putting a record on, listening to a CD, putting a cassette in a cassette player. Okay, that would be an interesting one. So, and then there's one about AI at the bottom. I want to do something about AI, make it specific. Is AI generated art? Should it be treated the same as human created art? Okay, is AI making us all stupid? So this is how we turn these general topics into something much more focused, where it's going to have a central argument, going to be loads more convincing, but focused in a way that you're not just trying to say something about everything to do, for example, with climate change. If we go with something much more focused, like how can teenagers reduce their carbon footprint through everyday choices, that's really tight and focused. That can be 5 minutes. It really tightens the focus of your research as well, and it's going to make your job much easier. So I hope that's a useful video. I hope that's giving you some ideas and also some guidance around research, so we're not just going away and generally randomly Googling things, which is going to be a waste of time, and we might not get very credible sources too.